The morning my father slid a single envelope across the dining table, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of burned toast. It should have felt ordinary. Instead, it became the morning my family believed they had ended everything I had spent 12 years building. The envelope stopped in front of me. I recognized my law firm's letterhead before I even touched it. My father leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "Go ahead," he said. "Read it out loud." My mother folded her hands as though she were attending Sunday service instead of witnessing her oldest daughter's public humiliation. Across from me, my younger sister, Brielle, stirred sugar into her coffee without taking her eyes off my face. She always enjoyed moments when attention shifted away from her perfection and toward my supposed failures. I opened the envelope carefully. The words were exactly what I expected. Notice of immediate termination. My employment had been terminated pending litigation connected to a $3,850,000 corporate lawsuit involving one of our largest clients. Silence settled over the table. Then my father laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A victorious one. "I told you," he said. "You spent so much time trying to prove you were smarter than everyone else. Now look at you." My mother sighed dramatically. "We raised you better than this, Naomi. You embarrassed this family." I folded the letter neatly before placing it back inside the envelope. "I understand," I answered quietly. Brielle smiled over the rim of her coffee cup. "That's all you're going to say?" I looked at her. "What would you like me to say?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe admit Dad was right." The room filled with another round of laughter. They thought silence meant defeat. They had absolutely no idea silence had become my greatest weapon. Looking back now, after everything that happened inside that courtroom months later, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Because the same people laughing across that breakfast table would eventually sit beneath polished oak walls while a judge ordered them to pay millions of dollars. But that part of my story hadn't happened yet. At exactly 8:17 a.m., my career appeared finished. At least, that was what everyone believed. My father reached for the newspaper. "You should have listened when I told you corporate law wasn't for someone like you." Someone like me. He never needed to explain what those words meant. Growing up as the darker-skinned daughter in our family, I heard them in different forms my entire life. Brielle looked more like our mother. She was praised for being elegant, approachable, photogenic. I was called intimidating, too serious, too ambitious. The difference was never my qualifications. It was what people chose to see before I even opened my mouth. My mother broke the silence again. "You should apologize to your father. He warned you about chasing status." I almost smiled. Status. That word controlled everything inside our family. Appearances mattered more than honesty. Reputation mattered more than love. Winning mattered more than truth. I stood and collected my briefcase. "You aren't going to your office," my father said confidently. "I have somewhere to be." He shook the termination letter. "No, you don't." I looked directly into his eyes. I said I have somewhere to be. For the first time that morning, his smile weakened. Only slightly. He expected tears. He expected excuses. He expected anger. Instead, I adjusted my navy blazer, picked up my car keys, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Brielle whisper, "She's pretending she's okay." My mother answered softly, "Reality will catch up with her." They believed reality had already arrived. What they didn't know is that mine had started weeks earlier. The cold morning air wrapped around me as I stepped outside. My phone vibrated once. A single encrypted notification appeared across the screen. "Documents secured. Do not discuss by phone.
No sender. No signature.
Just 6 words. I locked my phone without reacting. If anyone had been watching through the front window, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just a woman who had supposedly lost everything. They would never have guessed my heartbeat remained perfectly steady, because I already knew something that would eventually change every life sitting around that breakfast table. I started my car and drove away without looking back. They thought they had burned my future. They never stopped to wonder why I refused to watch it burn. And the answer to that question would become the most expensive lesson they would ever learn. Love always had conditions. The hardest truth I ever accepted was that betrayal rarely begins with one dramatic moment. It begins with small lessons repeated so often that they start sounding like love. Looking back, I can trace every crack in my family's foundation to my childhood, when approval was treated like a prize that had to be earned instead of a gift freely given. Growing up, my younger sister, Brielle, never had to wonder whether she belonged. She walked into every room with effortless confidence because our parents made sure she knew she was their greatest achievement. Her lighter skin, bright smile, and outgoing personality fit the image my father wanted the world to admire. I was different. My skin was darker. My personality was quieter. My dreams reached beyond our neighborhood, and somehow that made people uncomfortable. You need to smile more, my mother often told me. People like girls who look approachable. I smiled politely every time. It never seemed to matter. Whenever relatives visited our home, my father proudly introduced Brielle first. This one lights up every room. Then he would gesture toward me. And this is Naomi. She's always buried in another book. The words sounded harmless. The message never was. By the time I turned 16, I understood exactly where I ranked inside my own family. Second. Always second. My mother insisted there were no favorites. We love both of our daughters equally, she would say, whenever someone questioned the obvious. Yet somehow, every family photograph centered around Brielle. Every celebration became another opportunity to praise her. Every disagreement somehow became my responsibility to resolve. Keeping peace inside the family usually meant sacrificing my own feelings. At first, I believed that was what maturity looked like. Years later, I realized it was manipulation wrapped in kindness. My father admired success, but only when it made him look successful too. Every accomplishment became another chance for him to tell people how well he had raised his daughters. The moment my choices reflected independence instead of obedience, his pride disappeared. When I earned admission into one of the country's top law schools, I expected celebration. Instead, my father folded the acceptance letter and asked one question. How much debt is this going to create? I received academic scholarships, I answered. He nodded without smiling. You should have studied something more practical. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're proud of you.
She paused.
But don't become one of those women who thinks a career matters more than family. Even encouragement arrived carrying invisible conditions.
I thank them anyway.
I spent years believing I simply had to work harder, graduate with honors, win difficult cases, build an impressive reputation. Surely success would finally earn unconditional respect. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Everything changed when my father introduced me to Richard Lawson. Richard was wealthy, polished, and remarkably confident. His expensive watches, tailored suits, and effortless charm convinced almost everyone that success naturally followed him wherever he went. My father admired him immediately, treating him less like a business partner and more like the son he had always wanted. Richard shook my hand during our first meeting. "So you're the attorney I've heard about." He smiled politely. "You look younger than I expected." "I hear that often. I suppose someone had to fill diversity quotas." The comment hung in the air. My father laughed. "It was just a joke." I smiled without agreeing. Richard leaned closer. "Corporate law is brutal, Naomi. Clients usually prefer attorneys with experience." "I have experience." "I'm sure you do." His tone suggested otherwise. Over the following months, Richard found subtle ways to question every achievement I earned. Whenever I won negotiations, he credited luck. Whenever I secured favorable settlements, he praised my colleagues instead. Whenever executives complimented my preparation, Richard reminded everyone that appearances often exaggerated competence. He never attacked directly. He simply planted enough doubt for others to finish the work themselves. What disturbed me most wasn't Richard's behavior. It was how comfortably my parents accepted it. "If Richard has concerns," my father once said after a business dinner, "maybe you should listen. I've reviewed every contract twice. He has decades of experience."
So do I.
"Not like him." My mother quietly interrupted before the conversation became uncomfortable. "Richard only wants what's best for everyone." Everyone. Apparently that word no longer included me. Looking back now, I finally understand something that escaped me for years. Every compliment I received came attached to expectations. Every celebration required obedience. Every expression of love depended on protecting the family's carefully polished image. The moment I became independent, I became inconvenient. Richard recognized that weakness before anyone else. One rainy evening, after another successful business meeting, I watched him remain behind in my father's office after everyone else walked toward the parking lot. Their voices were low enough that I couldn't hear every word through the partially closed door. I caught only one sentence. Richard smiled coldly and said, "If you truly want Naomi out of the way, I have a plan that will end her career permanently." They declared war the moment Richard Lawson decided I was a threat instead of an inconvenience. Everything changed. Looking back, I realized the attack on my career wasn't impulsive. It was carefully designed, legally calculated, and emotionally devastating. Every conversation, every rumor, and every accusation appeared separately, but together they formed a trap that almost destroyed everything I had built. Richard understood one dangerous truth. People rarely question a lie when it comes from someone they already admire. Within days, whispers began circulating through corporate boardrooms and legal circles. Anonymous complaints claimed I had violated attorney ethics during a multi-million-dollar merger involving one of my firm's largest clients. The allegations suggested I had improperly shared confidential information and created conflicts of interest. None of it was true, but truth moves slowly.
Rumors travel first.
The first client canceled our meeting with almost no explanation. "I'm sorry, Naomi," the CEO said quietly over the phone. "Our board thinks it's best to pause everything until these allegations are resolved." "I understand. I truly hope this isn't what it looks like."
So do I.
After ending the call, I sat in complete silence. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. Someone had invested significant effort into making the accusations appear believable. The timing, the language, even the legal terminology reflected planning rather than emotion. They weren't trying to hurt my feelings. They were trying to erase my credibility. Unfortunately, they almost succeeded. Within 2 weeks, 3 more corporate clients suspended their contracts. Another terminated theirs completely. Every cancellation affected more than me. My small legal consulting firm employed talented people who trusted my leadership. Paralegals, administrative assistants, researchers, and junior attorneys suddenly faced shrinking workloads because someone had decided destroying my reputation was acceptable collateral damage. One afternoon, my office manager stepped into my office carrying revised financial projections. "If this continues another month," she said gently, "we may have to reduce staff hours." The words landed heavier than every rumor combined. These people had families, mortgages, children. They were paying the price for lies they didn't even understand. That evening I walked through the nearly silent office. Desks that normally buzzed with conversation sat empty. Conference rooms remained dark. The familiar energy had disappeared. I promised myself something as I turned off the lights. If I survived this, I would bring every one of them back. Across town, my father seemed to enjoy every update. At a charity fundraiser, I overheard him speaking with several business owners. "It's unfortunate," he said while shaking his head dramatically. "Naomi embarrassed the family. We warned her that ambition without wisdom eventually catches up with everyone." His audience nodded sympathetically. Not one person asked whether the accusations had been proven. Reputation had already become conviction. My mother defended him later that evening. "Your father is only protecting what's left of our family's name." "Our family name wasn't under investigation," I replied calmly. "My integrity was." She looked away instead of answering. That silence told me everything. Brielle offered no comfort either. She smiled faintly before saying, "Maybe this is a chance to start over somewhere smaller. I built my career one case at a time. And now it's disappearing." She sounded almost relieved. Richard, however, remained the most confident of them all. During a corporate reception, he approached me with practiced sympathy. "I heard business has slowed."
It has.
"That's unfortunate." He paused long enough to enjoy the moment. Corporate law can be unforgiving. Sometimes reputations never recover. "I'll remember that." "I hope you do." As he walked away, he believed he had already won. What Richard didn't know was that every accusation left fingerprints. Every forged document created a trail. Every private meeting involved someone who noticed more than he realized. They thought they were celebrating my permanent downfall. They had absolutely no idea someone, somewhere, had quietly begun collecting evidence while they congratulated themselves. I still didn't know who that person was. I only knew I wasn't completely alone. 3 nights later, at exactly 9:42 p.m., my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. A calm, older voice spoke only one sentence. "Naomi, if you want the truth, meet me tomorrow morning."
Come alone.
The line went dead. The flash drive the next morning, I arrived outside Judge Harold Bennett's office at exactly 8:30 a.m. The old brick building stood in complete silence, its polished brass directory reflecting the gray winter sky. Every step toward his office felt heavier than the last, yet something deep inside me whispered that this meeting would change everything. Judge Bennett had retired from the federal bench 3 years earlier, but to me, he was never simply a judge. He had mentored me during law school, challenged my thinking, and taught me that facts always outlived emotions. His assistant welcomed me with a gentle smile before opening the heavy oak door. "He's been expecting you." Judge Bennett stood beside the window with a cup of black coffee. "I was wondering how long it would take before they came after you," he said quietly. "I didn't expect it to happen like this. They rarely announce themselves." He motioned for me to sit. The office smelled of old books, polished wood, and fresh coffee. Framed court opinions lined the walls beside photographs of legal ceremonies spanning decades. It was the kind of room where truth seemed more important than power. Without another word, he placed a thick sealed envelope on the desk. Beside it rested a small black encrypted flash drive. I stared at both items. "What is this?" He folded his hands calmly. "The beginning of your defense." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were copies of corporate contracts, banking records, email chains, board meeting minutes, and transaction summaries. Every page had been organized chronologically with handwritten notes identifying suspicious financial movements. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. That was how I always reacted when emotion gave way to strategy. Judge Bennett slid the flash drive toward me. "The digital files complete the picture." I looked at him without speaking. He continued.
Encrypté d'email archive.
Internal communications.
Audio recordings.
Financial transfers. Everything has already been authenticated. I inserted the drive into the secure laptop sitting on his desk. Folder after folder appeared. Recorded conference calls. Wire transfer confirmations. Draft agreements. Private correspondence. Every file connected another piece of the puzzle. One recording immediately caught my attention. Richard Lawson's voice filled the quiet office. "If Naomi asks questions, she'll become the problem." Another voice answered. "We'll make sure nobody believes her." My stomach tightened. Judge Bennett remained silent while I continued listening. Another recording revealed discussions about manipulating stock disclosures before a corporate acquisition. Several emails showed deliberate concealment of financial information that should have been disclosed to investors. The evidence pointed toward something far more serious than professional gossip. It suggested a coordinated pattern of securities fraud. Then I found something that hurt even more. My father's name, my mother's signature. Both appeared repeatedly in documents authorizing meetings and approving transactions that should never have existed. I closed the laptop slowly. They knew. Judge Bennett nodded once. They knew enough. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The ticking wall clock became the loudest sound in the room. I kept asking myself why they hated me. He looked directly into my eyes. "This was never about hate." "What was it?" "You became dangerous the moment your integrity threatened their ambitions." His answer settled over me with painful clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. The rumors, the fabricated ethics complaints, the coordinated attacks. None of them happened by accident. They had been carefully planned. Judge Bennett leaned forward. "Naomi, listen carefully." I met his gaze. "If you respond emotionally, they'll win. I know if you respond publicly before you're ready, they'll adapt." "I understand." He tapped the envelope gently. "So, don't defend yourself." The advice sounded impossible. He continued. "Build your case. Let the evidence speak. The law doesn't need anger. It needs proof." I left his office, carrying the envelope inside my briefcase and the flash drive locked in a secure case. Outside, the cold air felt different. Not warmer, sharper. For the first time since losing my position, I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I had found them. That evening I sat alone in my apartment. Rain tapped softly against the windows while city lights blurred across the glass. My untouched dinner grew cold on the kitchen counter as I spread every document across the dining table. The silence finally caught up with me. Not the silence of defeat. The silence that follows unbearable truth. Tears rolled down my face before I noticed them. I wasn't crying because I had lost my job. I was grieving the family I thought I had. Every memory suddenly carried a different meaning. Every smile, every compliment, Every promise. I let myself feel the weight of that loss. Only once. When the tears stopped, I gathered every page, returned the flash drive to its case, and locked both inside my fireproof safe. Then I opened a fresh legal notebook. Across the first page, I wrote 3 simple words. Document.
Verify. Wait.
I would not chase rumors. I would not argue with lies. I would not ask people to believe me. I would make them confront the truth instead. From that night forward, I stopped surviving and started calculating. Every move was already planned. Silence became my greatest advantage. The people trying to destroy my career mistook my absence for surrender. They believed every unanswered accusation, every canceled interview, and every quiet day meant I was accepting defeat. Looking back now, I understand why they felt so confident. They could only see the moves they were making. They never imagined I had already started making mine. Every morning began before sunrise. At exactly 6:15 a.m., I met with a small team inside a secure conference room borrowed from Judge Bennett's former law partner. The blinds stayed closed. Every visitor signed a confidentiality agreement before entering. Every document was scanned, cataloged, and preserved according to evidentiary standards. No one raised their voice. No one celebrated small victories. We simply worked. A retired federal investigator spread financial records across the conference table. These wire transfers don't match the disclosures, he said. A forensic accountant adjusted her glasses. They moved funds through 3 shell companies before the merger closed. I studied every highlighted page. So Richard believed no one would compare the transaction dates. She nodded. He counted on people being too busy. He counted on arrogance. The room fell quiet. That single word explained almost everything. Over the following weeks, every forged document Richard created became another piece of evidence against him. Every misleading email created another contradiction. Every altered contract revealed a timeline that became impossible for him to explain. The more carefully we looked, the more his entire operation began to unravel. I stopped responding to rumors completely. I never defended myself online. I never called reporters. I never argued with former colleagues. The truth didn't need publicity. It needed preparation. Meanwhile, my family interpreted my silence exactly as Richard hoped they would. One afternoon, my mother left me a voicemail. "Naomi, people are talking. If you would simply admit your mistakes, maybe this family could help repair your reputation." I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted it. There was nothing left to discuss. A few days later, I attended a business networking reception at the invitation of an old colleague. I knew Richard would be there. I also knew several respected attorneys and executives would witness every conversation. Richard approached with his usual polished smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." I was invited. He looked around the room. "I'm surprised anyone still returns your calls." I met his eyes calmly. "Good evening, Richard." He laughed softly. "You still think you're part of this world." I never stopped being part of it. His smile faded. "You've already lost your firm." "I've lost a position." "You'll lose much more." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When this is over, you'll never practice corporate law again." I said nothing. He continued, "I'll bankrupt you if I have to." Several nearby guests glanced toward us. Richard noticed them, but couldn't stop talking. "You should have accepted defeat weeks ago." I simply nodded once. "Thank you for your opinion." Then I walked away. What Richard didn't know was that every word he spoke reinforced the pattern investigators had already documented. His confidence encouraged him to speak too freely. His threats revealed motive. His arrogance erased caution. They thought they controlled the board. In reality, every conversation was quietly becoming another exhibit. The investigation continued to grow. Federal investigators interviewed witnesses. Financial analysts reconstructed transaction histories. Civil litigators organized evidence into chronological timelines. Every meeting ended with the same reminder: facts first, emotion never. I repeated those words every night before going to sleep. Some evenings were still difficult. I missed my clients. I missed my team. I missed the career I had built through years of discipline. But I no longer missed my family's approval. That loss had already happened long before the lawsuit. Late one Friday afternoon, Judge Bennett reviewed the latest evidence binder before closing it carefully. They're becoming careless. They think they've already won. They usually do. He smiled faintly. That's when people make irreversible mistakes. 2 weeks later, the final filings were submitted. Every affidavit had been signed. Every financial report had been verified. Every recording had been authenticated. For the first time since my career collapsed, I allowed myself to believe justice might actually arrive. Not quickly, not dramatically, legally. 3 days later, my attorney called just after 10 a.m. The court has reviewed the filings. I stood beside my office window, without speaking. The judge has scheduled the first hearing. I closed my eyes for only a second. Months of silence had finally reached the courtroom. The game Richard believed he was controlling was about to begin on a very different board. Silence terrified them. The courthouse was already full when I stepped through the security checkpoint at 8:41 a.m. The marble floors reflected the morning light, and quiet conversations echoed beneath the high ceilings. CEOs, senior attorneys, journalists, investors, and retired judges occupied nearly every bench outside the courtroom. No one looked at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with curiosity. I wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a single silver pin on the lapel. It wasn't chosen for fashion. It was chosen because it reminded me that discipline had carried me further than anger ever could. It felt less like clothing and more like armor. My attorney greeted me with a slight nod. Ready? I've been ready for weeks. We entered the courtroom together. Richard Lawson was already seated at the defense table. His expensive suit projected confidence, but his smile widened the moment he saw me. I almost didn't recognize you, he said with a quiet laugh. I assumed someone facing professional ruin would look different. I met his eyes without answering. He leaned back comfortably. Still pretending this case is going your way? I placed my notebook on the table and folded my hands. Silence. He chuckled. I suppose your attorney finally realized you're better off saying nothing. Again, I said nothing. From the corner of my eye, I noticed my father watching the exchange with unmistakable satisfaction. My mother sat beside him with perfect posture, convinced the morning would end exactly as Richard had promised. My younger sister avoided looking directly at me, though I could see the confidence in her expression. They believed they had already won. What they didn't know was that every confident smile in their row would slowly disappear before lunch. The bailiff announced the judge's arrival. Everyone stood. After the opening formalities, my attorney rose. Your Honor, the plaintiff moves to admit a collection of authenticated financial records, internal correspondence, transaction histories, and digital evidence previously disclosed during discovery. He placed several organized binders on the clerk's desk. Finally, he produced a small encrypted flash drive. The room became noticeably quieter. Richard's attorney frowned. We object until proper foundation is established. It will be, my attorney replied calmly. One witness after another testified about the chain of custody, digital authentication procedures, and forensic verification. The explanations were methodical rather than dramatic. Every answer added another brick to a wall Richard could no longer walk around. The flash drive was admitted into evidence. Large monitors inside the courtroom displayed email chains, financial spreadsheets, and corporate communications. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Facts have their own volume. Richard shifted in his chair for the first time. An investigator highlighted inconsistencies between public disclosures and internal financial transfers. A forensic accountant explained how multiple transactions followed identical patterns despite appearing unrelated. An expert in digital evidence described how archived emails had been recovered and verified without alteration. Each witness spoke calmly. Each answer narrowed Richard's options. He whispered repeatedly to his attorney. His confidence began to crack. My father leaned toward Richard, searching his face for reassurance. Richard didn't look back. Another document appeared on the courtroom screen. Then another. Then another. The timeline became impossible to ignore. Every record reinforced the previous one. Every explanation fit the evidence already before the court. My attorney never exaggerated. He simply allowed the documents to speak. I remained silent. Looking back now, I realized my silence frightened them more than any speech ever could. They expected anger. They expected accusations. Instead, they watched me sit perfectly still while the evidence dismantled the story they had spent months constructing. Richard finally stood. This proves nothing. His voice sounded sharper than before. My attorney responded without emotion. The documents will speak for themselves. Richard attempted another smile. It's all circumstantial. The forensic accountant calmly pointed to another authenticated record. It is directly supported by banking records. The smile disappeared. Journalists wrote faster. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. My mother slowly lowered her eyes to the table in front of her. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced certainty. Richard asked to review one exhibit again, then another. His attorney's whispered advice became increasingly urgent. He no longer looked like the man who had mocked me before the hearing. He looked like someone searching desperately for a mistake that wasn't there. My father finally understood something was wrong. His shoulders stiffened. His expression changed from confidence to confusion. He looked toward Richard again. Richard refused to meet his eyes. The judge reviewed several pages in silence before asking a series of measured questions about transaction dates, internal approvals, and corporate authorizations. Each answer led naturally to the next.
No dramatic speeches. No theatrical surprises.
Only carefully documented facts. The atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted almost imperceptibly. People who had entered expecting allegations now watched evidence assemble itself into a coherent picture. Richard's breathing became noticeably heavier. He requested water. His attorney quietly placed a hand on his arm before speaking to him in a whisper. Across the aisle, I remained exactly where I had been since the hearing began. Hands folded, eyes forward, completely silent. Then one final document appeared on the screen. The courtroom froze. Richard's face lost its color. My parents stared at the exhibit without speaking. The judge looked up slowly, removed his glasses, and addressed both legal teams. We will take a brief recess before proceeding further. The gavel struck once. No one moved immediately. Everyone understood they had just witnessed something that could change the entire case. The silence that followed was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone in the courtroom. The judge ended their game. The courtroom settled into complete silence as everyone returned from recess. The polished wooden benches no longer felt like seats for spectators. They felt like front-row tickets to the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. I remained seated with my hands folded. Months earlier, I would have tried to defend myself. Now I understood something far more powerful. Evidence never needed emotion. Richard Lawson adjusted his tie before taking the witness stand again. The confidence he had displayed that morning had vanished, replaced by restless glances toward his attorney. My attorney approached the podium calmly. "Mr. Lawson, do you recognize this email?" Richard looked at the screen.
Yes.
"You testified earlier that you never instructed anyone to alter financial disclosures." "That's correct." My attorney displayed another exhibit. "And this message?" Richard hesitated.
I don't remember sending that.
The courtroom remained still. My attorney read the email aloud. "Delay the disclosure until after the merger closes. Naomi will become the perfect distraction." Richard swallowed hard. "I was speaking hypothetically. Were you?" Another document appeared. Then another. Each one carried the same digital signature. Each one contradicted his testimony from only minutes earlier. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson, you are under oath." Richard's voice grew uneven. "Those messages don't tell the full story." "They tell enough," my attorney replied. One by one, the inconsistencies multiplied. Transaction records, board approvals, internal memoranda, recorded conference summaries. Every answer Richard gave created another contradiction. His greatest weakness had never been a lack of intelligence. It was arrogance. He believed no one had assembled the entire picture. He was wrong. Across the courtroom, my father shifted uncomfortably for the first time all day. My mother whispered something to him. Neither looked at me. My attorney turned toward them. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, these authorization forms contain your signatures. Do you deny approving these meetings?" My father cleared his throat. "We relied on Richard's advice." "So your position is that you signed documents without understanding them?" "We trusted our business partner." My attorney nodded. Trust does not erase responsibility. My mother's shoulders slumped. "We never intended for Naomi to lose her career." The words echoed through the room. For a brief moment, I almost believed she expected sympathy. Instead, another document appeared on the screen. It was an internal email. My father's reply was short. "Proceed. She'll recover, and our reputation will remain intact." No one spoke. My father slowly lowered his head. Years of protecting appearances had ended with one sentence preserved in an email archive. The judge reviewed the exhibits in silence before removing his glasses. The evidence establishes a coordinated effort to conceal material financial information while knowingly allowing false allegations to damage the plaintiff's professional reputation. His voice remained calm. That made every word heavier. The court further finds that multiple parties knowingly participated in conduct that caused substantial financial and reputational harm. Richard's attorney attempted one final objection. The judge overruled it immediately. Richard looked toward my father. My father looked away. The alliance that had seemed unbreakable only hours earlier dissolved without another word. The judge continued. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. Civil damages are awarded in the amount of $18,750,000. A collective breath swept through the courtroom. The judge wasn't finished. The court also orders additional financial penalties, reimbursement of legal costs, and permanent professional sanctions consistent with the governing rules of professional and corporate conduct. Richard closed his eyes. His shoulders fell. For months he had mocked my career, questioned my integrity, and promised to bankrupt me. Now he couldn't even lift his head. My mother quietly wiped away tears. My father stared at the floor that had once carried him into boardrooms with confidence. My younger sister sat frozen, finally understanding that status built on deception always carries an expiration date. No celebration escaped my lips. No smile crossed my face. Winning had never been about humiliating them. It was about reclaiming the truth they tried to bury. As I gathered my files, I realized my greatest victory wasn't the judgment. It was that I had never become the person they wanted me to be. The judge signed the final order. The sound of the pen against paper was almost impossible to hear. Yet it was louder than every insult, every rumor, and every lie that had come before. Justice didn't raise its voice, it simply signed its name. The price of betrayal. 6 months after the judge signed the final order, life became remarkably quiet. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt like peace. The headlines faded, the television interviews stopped, and the courtroom emptied. What remained were consequences that no amount of money or influence could erase. Richard Lawson's world collapsed exactly as he had built it. Federal investigators expanded their inquiry after reviewing evidence introduced during the civil proceedings. Former associates who once praised his leadership began cooperating with authorities. Corporate boards quietly removed his name from advisory positions. Financial institutions terminated long-standing relationships. Every carefully polished image he had protected disappeared beneath the weight of documented facts. He had spent years believing power meant controlling other people. Instead, he learned that accountability arrives one signature at a time. My father suffered a different kind of downfall. No court ordered his loneliness. Business leaders simply stopped calling. Invitations to private dinners vanished. Charity boards replaced him without public announcements. The executives who once sought his advice suddenly found themselves too busy to return his messages. His reputation had depended on the illusion of impeccable judgment, and once that illusion disappeared, so did the respect he valued more than his own family. Looking back, I realized he had feared public embarrassment far more than losing me. Eventually, he lost both. My mother tried desperately to preserve the social circle she had spent decades building. She hosted gatherings that few people attended. Friends who once praised her elegance slowly drifted away, unwilling to associate themselves with scandal. She had devoted her life to protecting appearances, only to discover appearances rarely remain loyal. For years she taught me that image was everything. Life taught her otherwise. Brielle faced the hardest adjustment of all. The comfortable lifestyle she had always considered permanent began disappearing piece by piece. Investors withdrew from family ventures. Luxury vacations ended. Designer shopping trips became memories instead of routines. For the first time, she had to build something without relying on someone else's influence. I never celebrated her struggle. I simply hoped she would learn what I had been forced to understand years earlier. Real confidence cannot be inherited. It has to be earned. As for me, I returned to work quietly. There were no grand reopening ceremonies.
No dramatic speeches.
Just a freshly painted office, clean conference rooms, and familiar faces walking through the front door one by one. The first person I rehired smiled before she even sat down. "I always believed you'd come back." I returned the smile. "Thank you for believing when it wasn't easy." Within months, every employee who had lost work because of the false allegations had returned. Together, we rebuilt the practice client by client, case by case, with a stronger commitment to integrity than ever before. The work felt different now. Success no longer meant proving my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. Success meant creating opportunities for others. That purpose inspired my next decision. Using part of the damages awarded by the court, I established annual scholarships for aspiring Black law students who had overcome financial hardship or discrimination. During the first award ceremony, I looked into the faces of young women who reminded me of myself years earlier. Determined, brilliant, often underestimated. I told them something I wish someone had told me sooner. Never confuse another person's opinion of your value with your actual worth. They applauded politely. I hoped they remembered the message long after they forgot my name. Some evenings, I still thought about everything my family and Richard had taken from me. Then I remembered everything they had accidentally given me instead. Resilience, wisdom, freedom. No judgment could restore the years I lost. But every lesson helped shape the life I built afterward. As I locked my office one evening and watched the city lights reflect across the windows, I realized revenge had never truly been my destination.
Justice was.
Growth was.
Peace was.
And that left me with one final question. Is success sometimes the most powerful revenge of all? They couldn't destroy what they never understood. People often ask me which moment changed my life the most. Was it the morning I lost my career? The afternoon I uncovered the evidence? Or the day the judge ruled in my favor? Looking back, none of those moments truly transformed me. The real turning point happened quietly, long before the courtroom, and long before justice carried my name. It happened the day I stopped measuring my worth by the people who refused to see it. For years, I believed I could earn unconditional love by working harder than everyone around me. I collected degrees, won impossible cases, and sacrificed countless nights chasing excellence, convinced that one more achievement would finally make my family proud. It never did. Every accomplishment was followed by another condition. Every victory came with another criticism. Every compliment carried invisible strings. The painful truth wasn't that I had failed them. It was that I had spent too many years trying to pass an exam they never intended for me to pass. Growing up as the darker-skinned daughter taught me lessons no child should have to learn. I watched beauty compared, personalities ranked, and futures measured by appearances instead of character. At first, I believed those judgments defined me. Eventually, I realized they only revealed the limitations of the people making them. Colorism steals confidence long before it steals opportunity. Conditional love teaches you to apologize for simply existing. Status obsession convinces people that appearances matter more than integrity. Those beliefs almost became my inheritance. Almost. Instead, life gave me something far more valuable.
Discipline.
Patience. Integrity. And the courage to remain calm when everything around me encouraged anger. The people who tried to destroy me never understood that truth. They believed power came from influence. I learned that real power comes from character. They believed silence meant weakness. I discovered silence creates space for truth to speak. They believed revenge required rage. I learned that justice requires preparation. When the lies spread through boardrooms and headlines, I wanted to defend myself immediately. I wanted everyone to know I was innocent. I'm grateful I didn't. Facts outlast emotions. Evidence outlasts rumors. The law, when pursued with patience and honesty, can outlast both. Winning in court restored my reputation, but healing my heart required something different. It required forgiving myself for spending so many years searching for acceptance in places where it never existed. Today, my office is filled with people who believe in honesty more than appearances. Young attorneys walk through the same doors I once entered carrying fear, and I do everything I can to remind them that talent should never shrink itself to make insecure people comfortable. My story is no longer about the family I lost. It is about the future I built. If you're listening to my voice today while carrying betrayal, rejection, or disappointment, I want you to remember something that took me far too long to understand. Do not let someone else's inability to recognize your value become the measure of your life. Protect your peace. Protect your name. Protect your integrity. Never rush to answer every accusation. Not every lie deserves your attention. Some only deserve your patience while the truth catches up. And when justice finally arrives, let it arrive through wisdom instead of bitterness. Because the greatest victory isn't watching someone else fall. It's standing where they insisted you could never stand. I used to believe my family held my future in their hands. They never did. My future was waiting for me the moment I chose myself over their approval. And that's why, when I look back on everything that happened, I no longer remember the insults first. I remember the lesson. The people who tried to write the ending of my story became nothing more than a footnote in my victory.